And welcome, dear friends, dear colleagues, to the second day of the event that we call Evolutionary Renaissance Assembly. And we have been discovering the whole day yesterday why we decided to call it this way. And actually we did. I think we discovered something. We recognized that, yes, the process of evolution might be one of the most fundamental processes happening in the universe. All of the universe is evolving, all of matter is evolving. And we are part of this process, and there are some suggestions that this process might have, let's say, a certain direction. We can see strong evidence that the universe we inhabit, and thank you, Jerome, for bringing this image of the universe to our conversation today. The universe we inhabit has some propensity to be favorable to consciousness and to life. And our conversation yesterday began with the recognition that we might be in what Confucius called the transition to the second life. So in the words of Confucius, he said that each human has two lives, and the second one begins when we recognize that we only have one life. And essentially, we have this recognition in regards to us as species, that we only have us in one single planet, that we are here to, which is our home, which is our birthplace, and the superorganism that we are part of. And to recognize how we align ourselves with this truth is actually all that this forum is dedicated to. How do we awaken to really become planetary species and be in service of planetary process? So we discussed we had part of conversation about this notion of planetizenship that needs to replace citizenship, and recognize that everyone, all beings on our planet are members of community that needs to collectively govern the space that we inhabit, and we need to recognize that all of our collective and personal wealth is derived from commons that are not owned by us. They are owned by all of our species if it comes to cultural commons, but also all of let's say natural commons are owned by all of the planet. So we cannot own them, and it's important that we recognize our role as more as custodians of in the planet, and come to that recognition. We discussed that dreams, human dreams, and dreams that may be more than human, that also we see our planet as a kind of being, and there are more and more evidence that it is so, that we could be part of the super intelligent being. The very recent paper by Adam Frank highlights that. If we recognize it, then probably it's not only our dream of the future, but also the dream of the Earth itself that we need to discover, and that can guide us through into the future, more desirable future for ourselves and for other species that we share our planet with. And the role of dreaming is really important, because it is about actually finding those threads of hope that we can cling to, that we can hold to and amplify in times that may look bleak, as they are now, in terms of the ongoing crisis, the military conflicts that are begin to happen and continue to happen around the world, climate crisis and biodiversity loss crisis. Despite that, we, through this collective dreaming and collective discovery, can find the threads of new hope, and really what we call join this dream of the Earth. And big part of that conversation that we held yesterday was about actually opening up to the fact that we are evolving, we are moving forward. Nobody knows the right answers, but we can ask questions that help us explore this transition, this process together. And we might recognize that we as human species are evolving. So, for example, in 100 years or in 50 years, being a human might mean a totally different thing. And that will also be the focus of the conversation today. What will our human economy look like in 50 or 100 years from now, when we are stepping into the age of sentient machines, when we recognize that extractive economies and extractive societies cannot hold any longer? Where are we transiting into, and how do we meet human needs and needs of other species and other planetary systems to discover this harmony that is a potential, the higher potential that we can collectively move into? So this was the conversation. I think it was much richer than what I tried to capture in those 4 or 5 minutes. But the role of conversation that we want to transit into today is to actually move from, let's say, aspirational ideas and visioning at the highest potential to pragmatics, to recognize that even if we sense the direction, we still need to make it real. And we can only make it real by finding some vessel for it. And the vessel is actually our collective activities in form of economy systems, governance systems, technologies, cultural norms. So different aspects of what really holds our societies together, what defines them and what can redefine them. So the purpose of our conversation right now, that opens up the second day, is to begin exploring what are these, let's say, facets of the emerging society, emerging economy. What are the new economic paradigms? And intentionally asking what are the next 50, but maybe even 100 years of economy. Of course, we may not know many things. Things are really changing fast right now. We are in this moment of history where a lot of paradigms are breaking, new things are emerging, new technologies are appearing every 5-10 years that are really massively disruptive. But at the same time, we see that this breaking of the paradigm really points to the new paradigm emerging, the new attractor. And to sense, to identify elements of that new attractor is the purpose of the conversation today. And I want to welcome our 5 panelists. And I know I've been criticized for having too much of Western male or older male dominated conversation, and this one probably is the biggest manifestation of that dominance. And I think that dominance is present not only we're not guilty of it. I really tried hard to break it and introduce as many, let's say, feminine voices, as many indigenous and global South voices, as many young people's voices as it was possible. But we still are kind of also locked in this space, unfortunately, and we will work hard to discover how we can include more voices. But right now, here we are, 5 males that are really wonderful and amazing experts on the topic of future of our societies and economy. Jerome, who is the founder of Millennium project, and you are a professional futurist, Jerome. Walt Stinson, who is decades-long career in actually making the consumer electronic industry in the world, and you've been one of the people who defined how it looks right now. We have Daniel Christian Wahl, who is how can I describe you, Daniel? You are the prophet of regenerative economy in a way. If I may use this, you certainly are one of the people who are seen as a reference point in this conversation. And we have Jarvis, who is actually, I think you're manifesting the idea of regenerative and green economy with your life. We also should have had James Ehrlich, but I cannot see James in the room right now. So maybe James is going to join us a bit later. So James, if you're here, please turn on your camera. Anyway, welcome. Welcome, and let's begin this conversation. Jerome, I might begin with you because you are working on one of the subjects that interests so many people. which is what is our relationship with this apparently very disruptive and transformative technology of artificial intelligence. And the new paradigms of usage of artificial intelligence is very present, very pretty much in the media. Some people say it's not as relevant. I think Daniel is going to contest the idea that this is the central conversation that needs to happen. But it is there, and some people say it might be the most powerful technology in the history of the whole humankind, similar to discovering a fire. And there are very dark scenarios around it. Dark scenarios of AI overtaking our society. Harari talks a lot about the idea that our society will be hijacked, the culture will be hijacked. We are facing the dead end of our culture and the dead end of our evolution. Yes, there are many dark scenarios. We heard them all. The question is, what are the good scenarios? What are the inspiring scenarios? What is the possible, let's say, future attractor that we can hope for? How we can amplify the potential of AI as one of the, let's say, tools for creating a better future for us and the planet. What's your point on this, Jerome? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I jokingly said in 25 words or less. Anyway.
Yes, indeed.
Actually, I wrote about this thing about 30, 40 years ago in Future Mind, Artificial Intelligence. And so I have been tracking this for a while. I'll make a couple of points, and then, because you can't cover all this stuff. First, the old story is if you can't beat them, join them. That's one strategy. And I think that's probably where we will actually end up going. Because if you say we're not going to join it, but we're going to keep AI over here and control it and so forth, and I'm working on the control full time with UN and parliamentary unions and all that sort of stuff, but I don't expect it to be 100% successful. So I think that long-term strategy is we become conscious technology, a continuum between human consciousness and technology that sort of blends way off in the future. Second, is that I wrote 3 scenarios on this in a report called Work Technology 2050 Scenarios and Actions. Anybody can find it online. And in one of the scenarios, number 3, the good scenario, the idea was you got 2 bell curves. One, your cost of living continues to go up and then comes down as you take labor out of production. So that what you have to pay people in a guaranteed income now is too high, but maybe in 10 years, you might be able to do it. The second one is you've got a whole bunch of new technologies that are going to cause new kinds of income, taxable income, that becomes the source for a lot of the new guaranteed income stuff. When those cross over, I figure it's about 10 years from now, but not right now. So when people talk about guaranteed income, I go, well, it depends on what's your assumptions, when you start, where you start, and all that sort of stuff. All right, move that over. If we had such a status where you had people not thrown in the streets eventually, then humans could be free to evolve with their mind, connect to networks around the world. So you would make a living out of being yourself, out of self-actualization. So you connect with those all around the world because you don't need that many people to put in $1 or €1 into what you're doing to actually make a living. And then as a result, such people that do this will be freer to evolve more quickly and be more humanistic, I believe, to connect to all kinds of causes. Because a lot of times we'd like to do good stuff, but it's hard to make a living doing good stuff sometimes. But now you can actually make a living doing good stuff. So I think the self-actualization economy and the merger of consciousness and technology, I think, are 2 long-term directions.
Thank you. I'm also reminded of additional scenarios that were recently discussed by Mark Andreessen in his essay on AI saving the world. I wonder if all people share this perspective. I would invite now Walt. You've been on one hand, Walt, on like I said, on the forefront of shaping the consumer electronic industry and watching technological trends. On the other hand, I know you currently are one of the leaders of Human Security for All project, which actually discusses how we can employ technologies to better serve humanity, and how can we take into consideration the risks that not only perhaps humanity, but also other planetary systems, and how can we take those risks that are emerging with technological evolution into consideration? You've seen decades of technology evolving. So how do you perceive the current transition? And what's your perspective on the future of economy that is emerging?
Well, I'm very excited about it. I view AI as a logical and natural evolution of digital technology. I think that we're still riding the wave of the development of digital technology and the emergence of digital technology. And I think we underestimate that the significance of digital technology and the length of time it takes for it to work itself out and to really realize its full potential. So to me, AI is just another development in the road of full realization of the potential of digital technology. My focus is really on the role of the entrepreneur in all of this. I think that if you look at the world and the way the population of the world has grown, technology is the only thing that appears to be growing as fast as the population of the world has been growing. In other words, exponentially. So we need to look to technology to help us solve our problems. We couldn't support 8.5 billion people on the planet if we didn't have technology, and we're not going to be able to solve the global problems, the existential problems that we're facing today, unless we utilize technology to do it. Some people could argue that technology has gotten us into this problem, but and in a sense it has. It's enabled us to grow our population to the size that it is, but that's really kind of a moot point at this point. At this point in time, we've got 8.5 billion people. We need to support them, and we need to do it, and at the same time have sustainable development and solve the existential crisis that we're facing right now. And circling back to AI again, I do think that AI is not an existential crisis. I think it's presented that way by people who don't really understand fully what it is. Certainly, it in its worst form, in the worst way that we can imagine it, it could be an existential crisis. But I don't feel that that's the way it's going to develop. I think the odds of it developing in its worst case scenario are very, very small, and that it's more likely that it's going to be a tool that's going to help technology solve some of the world's most pressing problems. And as far as human security for all is concerned, I view HS4A as a model, a way of balancing, a way of understanding that all of the world's problems are interconnected, they're context specific, and that we need to understand that all these problems are interrelated with one another. We can't just focus on one thing and solve that, like climate change, for example. Solve climate change and expect all of the other problems of the world to be resolved. We need to understand that there are a lot of complex problems that we're facing right now, and that we need to address all of them more or less simultaneously, and technology can help us do that.
I'm curious to explore your vision of more comprehensive vision, because you say we underestimate the potential of digital technologies, but maybe we can do it in the second round. And I wanted to invite Daniel, Christian Moore. I feel like you are moving in your seat, Daniel. And I know you are, when I shared my recent book with you, you said that this looks too techno-optimistic to you. And actually, I'm trying to balance the perspective that Walt is expressing, for example, with people that are really concerned about, for example, the environmental consequences of deploying more technologies. So what do you think, Daniel, in terms of the challenges we are facing right now, the paradigm that might be emerging, and in particular the role of technologies as let's say a pathway forward, given that you were a little bit concerned about that techno-optimistic stance? I think you need to unmute yourself. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, it's wonderful that you've invited so many diverse perspectives onto this, and there's no, in taking a different perspective, there's no critique implied on anybody having a different one. But for me, it's interesting to observe that we're talking about the future of the next 50 years of economy, singular, and somehow the conversation is all about technology, which means that we should highlight that there's an implicit assumption that technology and economy are now fundamentally linked or almost the same thing. I'm not sure. And like this increase of human population and technology use is directly related to the use of fossil fuels and fossil materials. And the discontinuity, the phase shift that is now imminent, is that we simply cannot use fossil fuels in this exponential curve any further without triggering already catastrophic climate change. And the depletion curves of pretty much every mineral on the periodic table are such that give or take another 30, 50, or let it be 100 years, we're going to run out of these core materials. And the promise of the circular economy, recycling all of that to enable future technologies simply flies in the face of the second law of thermodynamics. Therefore, there is a discontinuity in terms of the ubiquity of technology as we have become accustomed to assume that that will just be around. But that doesn't mean that technology is not important. There's a conversation online where I'm being called a techno-optimist by Dennis Meadows. So I'm not all against technology, but I think we're now at the critical point in human history where we have to ask the question, if in 20 years from now, we have to do with about 4 terawatts instead of 21 terawatts per second as a civilization, and we have to reduce our material throughput again to something like it was 100 years ago. We have 1,000-folded the material throughput in 1 century. If that's the case, then how do we deploy our technological capabilities and the remaining energy and materials in such a way that we allow for the decentralized restructuring of the human presence on Earth in such a way that we're not talking anymore about 50 years of the economy, but we're talking about regenerative economies that are carefully adapted to the biocultural uniqueness of the places and bioregions within which they find their primary agency, not in a digital space, but in an analog space as custodians of the ecosystems on whose future we depend and who bring us forth. It's a cultural shift away from owning land to becoming expressions of land again. And it's kind of nice that Jerome and I have these different backgrounds, because on the one hand, we have this cosmic deep galaxy field out there in space that contextualizes us on this little speck of dust, which is planet Earth. But behind me are the world's river systems. And that is a biophysical reality within which we need to reinvent human economic activity in such a way that we nurture these bioregions again, that we increase the biological productivity, clean rivers, forests, topsoils, all of that, because that is the fundamental primary productivity of the planet on which all economy depends. Everything else is simply a techno fantasy. And that, so how do we nuance that? It means that, yes, circular economies, but at the local and regional scale. But what are the enabling technology platforms that would allow us to create diverse regenerative cultures based on diverse regenerative economies that maybe circulate 80% of production and consumption at the local and regional scale, but what is that precious 20% that enables that? And how do we maintain, for example, this magical technology that we can connect and knowledge exchange at a distance with relatively low environmental costs? So it's not anti-technological, but we need to stop this, like Elon, like there's 3 or 4 billionaires that have invested a lot of money into brainwashing us into believing that we'll just mine asteroids and that the biophysical limits of a dynamic living planet don't matter. And if we don't learn that quickly, we'll learn it the hard way pretty soon.
Thank you, Daniel. I would welcome Jarvis. Jarvis, Walt mentioned the role of entrepreneurs, and you are actually trying to navigate that world as an entrepreneur who, on one hand, kind of creates a green type of business, but also you need to operate in this technologically rich world. So what's your perspective on the trends that are shaping the future of our economy and like the attractors that are emerging?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I run a kind of sustainable business, restorative retail, ethical lifestyle media company. I've done that for 15 years. So, I've kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve of what everybody's now kind of identifying as a crisis. I always wonder, is nature calling this a crisis, or is that just a human arrogance? So, that's the thing that I always explore is, what's nature actually trying to teach us? So when it comes to AI, I think it can be hugely beneficial for all of the things that have been positively expressed about it. But it also gives me insight to human evolution in terms of awareness, consciousness, perhaps wisdom. We're creating systems on the outside of us that are perhaps already functioning well and truly within us. I think all of this knowledge is already deeply within us. So we're creating external experiences of access to information or data, if you like, that is actually already well embedded within us. So my thing is always trying to teach people to look within before they begin to try and assimilate what's happening on the outside. In terms of the green economy, I mean, the big thing that's going on at the moment is donut economics and boundaries and planetary boundaries and, all of that. And that to me all feels quite limiting. I think this planet is way more conscious than we are. I think if I can call her she has an opportunity and is giving us guidance how we can perhaps evolve as a species, as a universe, as a whatever, the cosmos. So I just think AI is just another step in human development for us to learn about ourselves. That's what I think. I mean, I studied with a female shaman indigenous to the UK for 14 years before getting into business, before becoming an entrepreneur. So I set up my business based on what I describe as natural principles, or even, dare I say it, sacred principles, not man-made laws, which is the very thing that's killing us at the moment. So because of that, I set up my business with non-competitiveness, inclusiveness, putting planet, people, purpose before profit, things that are just, kind of everybody's understanding that now. But and why did I do that? I did it because I spent 14 years listening to nature and learning indigenous ways, learning the natural sacred ways that are already embedded in my cellular memory and in my ancestral line. And I just chose to connect with that before I got into business. So I think what's happening now is there's a great awakening. And all of these technologies on the outside of us are simply teaching us about ourselves. That's my take on it. I do believe that if we get it right, and if enough human beings are willing to step forward and challenge the Elon Musk, make as much money as you can, let's take it off planet. I think if we can challenge those billionaire models and actually say, hold on a minute, let's just work with the planet we've got, that we know we can exist in a harmonious, symbiotic, conscious, connected, collaborative, co-creative way, then I think that's the challenge, is fighting against those, those money-making machines that are, feeding a narrative that, hardly anybody's ever going to get to that level of maturity and finances. So I hope that answers a bit from my perspective.
Thank you. And I think we kind of establish now a range of perspectives, which I don't see as mutually exclusive on one hand. And thank you, Jarvis. I sense in your words really an opportunity for convergence. And that's actually what I'm hoping for in our conversation, maybe in the next 30 minutes as we progress. I would welcome you also, colleagues, to kind of take a position on each other. So I'm not only the one steering this conversation further, but maybe just to kind of encourage, I would like to highlight that I sense there is, on one hand, this more, let's say, tech-focused, indeed, narrative that says, yes, technology is a pathway, is a solution. There are some extremely powerful solutions, especially in the digital space. On the other hand, we need to recognize limitations. And these limitations are present, and they're kind of imposed on us not only as constraints, but also as enablers to discover what Jarvis was just talking about, more about ourselves, our relationship with the planet that we inhabit, and kind of opening up this possibility for transcendence beyond the models that we're currently exhibiting. But in that regard, again, like my central question for you in this panel is, what is calling us? What is this new paradigm that can emerge? Because Jerome, you have highlighted there are three possible scenarios, more optimal, more negative. What do you think would be the pathway in the ones that are more, let's say, attractive to us collectively? Also taking in mind, I hear some of your conversation, you highlight the human aspect, but if we take into mind what Daniel was just talking about, how do we see that future emerging?
Well, there's too many things to say all at once.
In 25 words or less, please.
Yeah. Okay. 25 words. Good to try it. Is that, yes, I talk about the merger of consciousness and technology and self-actualization economy and all of that. However, one of the key variables in this has just been touched in a bit, and that is the quality of such a conscious technology civilization, in my judgment, is how well the mystic in ourselves and in society and the technocrat in ourselves and in society can create synergy. One of the things I've learned after 50 years of futures research is that whatever you look at in the future turns out more complex than you think is possible. And then you double it, you get closer to the truth. So I think that the idea of like making our relationship to the planet more healthy and synergetic is absolutely right. But at the same time, what does life do? It always goes to where it's not. So space, migration eventually, I think, is an inevitable thing. There's one view that human will not know what it really is until it, like a child, doesn't know what it is until it's independent of the parents. Well, our parent is the sun. We're 100% dependent on that sun. And so until we eventually leave the solar system and grow up, then we really won't know our full capacity, but we're still in the embryonic stage. And yes, we've got to make sure that the environment we're in is healthy. But the idea of pitting the technocrat against the mystic, to me, is an absolute mistake. Is that we've got to figure out what is the harmony or the synergy between these two views and have that play out in society. Just like great performances, and I'll stop here. And a great performance, let's say a piano player, the press interviews him. What was it like? Well, it felt like the composer and the piano and the music and my fingers merged into one great performance. Exactly. Is that mystical or is that technological? It is a merger of both. And I think that is the criteria that will help us navigate all this sort of stuff and continue with a both and, rather than that's right, that's wrong, tiring. It's a complex future.
It is a complex future. Walt, what's your sense of it? What are your sense of that complex future we have in front of us? You're muted.
You asked me earlier what forces I thought were at work here. And I think the most important thing to focus on is what are the aspirations that are driving society right now. And I think there are a bunch of them. I do think there's a spiritual aspiration at work here. I think there is a societal aspiration at work, a political aspiration. there's an economic aspiration, and what I focus on is the personal aspiration, because I work with companies. I work with 500 companies, 500 CEOs who have a mix of forces driving them. Sometimes personal aspirations, sometimes economic aspirations. But what I do see is that the forces are converging, and out of that convergence comes entrepreneurial activity. In many cases, the entrepreneurs don't really know exactly, they're not motivated necessarily by a societal benefit that's driving them, or a political one, or a regulatory one, or an economic one. It's just it's a personal expression, right? They've got energy, they want to pour it into something, and they want it to be successful. So right now, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in solving some of these problems. I think that we fail, we talk about these things as if we can do something about them. All we can do about them is talk about them. But somebody's got to actually go out there in the world and do something and make something happen. And that's where the entrepreneurs come in. And they're willing to risk their personal sweat equity and their financial future and bet it on outcomes that are going to be beneficial. Sometimes they focus on personal benefits, but sometimes they focus on societal benefits or taking advantage of a regulatory climate. What I will say is that I like to think of Mother Nature sprinkling the world with seeds, entrepreneurial seeds that sprout. And some of those seeds are going to sprout in a way that result in solutions to the problems that we're talking about today. And the winds that are blowing those seeds around are powerful winds that have the components in them that we discussed previously. But I really have a lot of hope, a lot of faith in the individual entrepreneur's ability to solve these problems. Not necessarily one individual person. I can't point to one person and say this person is going to solve the problem. What I can point to is that thousands of entrepreneurs out there, one of whom is going to solve important problems that are going to address some of the issues that the other panelists have already raised, such as the planetary sink and what we're going to do about that, and how to overcome resource constraints and develop more efficient models. But I think that's the entrepreneur's role.
Thank you, Walt. Well, one question that rises in my mind, and I think we can actually explore this question a bit later, is whether it's an individual capacity or whether it has to be a collective capacity, some kind of movements of entrepreneurs. And what people are discussing now are ecosystems. So operating in the same way as nature does, like collaborating, building on top of each other's solutions and so on. And maybe I'll ask it straight back to you, because you're mentioning more the individual capacity, that ability to solve problems from the personal perspective. But what is the role of that collective dimension in your experience?
Well, of course, you can't separate the two, right? I think that we have a collective need, and we're recognizing more and more with each passing day how important and how pressing that need is. And out of that, I think, emerges individual expressions that result in solutions to that collective need. And what really happens is that we get organizations that form themselves around visions, personal visions that people have about solutions. So as those organizations develop their capacity and build themselves up, first into a group of 8 people and then into a group of 100 people or 200 and then 1,000 people, then those groups develop power to actually move the needle. And that's what we see happening.
Thank you. I think we also have James joining us, but let me meanwhile turn to Daniel. Daniel, when you listen to this perspective, and I know you raised some of the concerns about it, but at the same time you highlight you're not techno-pessimist in this conversation. What's your take of it?
A number of things. Like, I also don't think it serves to pitch this as some one side against the other or anything. Like, with regard to the opportunities of entrepreneurs in this transformation that we now need to do, we need to create whole new ecosystems at the regional scale of small enterprises that enable increased regional production for regional consumption based on regionally regeneratively grown biomaterials, in order to shrink the amount of technological materials in the technological material cycle, which is partially driving the environmental impact, because we simply cannot afford to mine all the minerals that are left, because half of them are under the biodiversity hotspots of the planet. But zooming out from that, we even in the framing, we still have a sort of very much, this is the present and we need to create a future, or moving towards a future. There's a flip to that, which is to say, in every place, people are expressing life's regenerative impulse every day, every second. They're expressing moments of caring, of sharing, of nurturing, of restoring. And if we use this lens of place-based identity, we can, rather than solve problems, work with the potential of these people in these places. And that's the fundamental shift from the sort of solutioneering, technologically focused approach of solving the sustainability issues towards working regeneratively with the potential of people in place. It's all the problems or issues still show up, but they show up in the specificity and context of real people and real places and real ecosystems. And within that context, there is a huge opportunity for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for building human ecosystems that are actually expressions of the limits and potential of particular places. And we need global coordination and global exchange to make that happen. So the sooner we get beyond this idea that this is one view pitched against another, the better. And I mean, Jarvis's story was somewhat pointing towards that we, like, he looked inside and inside his wider nature of nature for deeper principles and deeper understandings of how this system actually creates conditions conducive to life. We are all expressions of life, and therefore we are capable to do that. Like, if those of you are interested, look at the PhD work of Lila June 2 years ago on indigenous land care management, and how indigenous people all around the world have been gardeners of abundance and increased bioproductivity. And so how do we come back to that? How do we let those core principles inform how we fit into this planet as regenerative keystone species of the places we inhabit? And the danger of the technological narrative that pushes everything, or even the evolutionary narrative that says we need to move into that rather than fan the embers of what we already are, which is a living, conscious universe becoming aware of itself, and a species capable of expressing life's fundamental principle, which is to create conditions conducive for more life to flourish. Thomas.
Thank you, Daniel. And I would like to welcome into our panel James. James, I'm sorry for confusion in time zones. Probably something happened, but thank you for being with us today.
No problem.
And we are already in the middle of conversation, and what we try to explore is, on one hand, what is that, let's say, the possible more optimal attractor, the shape of future economy that can emerge in the coming decades. given all challenges we are facing, the limitations of planetary system, the depletion of resources, but at the same time, the enormous and continually amplifying technological potential that we observe, and there was highlight that this potential is still, let's say, we still underestimate it. There are many optimal scenarios around it. Walt, in particular, has been highlighting the role of entrepreneurs as people that are shaping this future reality. And I really like your expression, Walt, of the Mother Earth sprinkling the seeds that become these entrepreneurial inspirations, converting into different forms of solutions. And James, you are an entrepreneur in residence for Stanford University, and you are working with actually this regenerative paradigm for many years. So we have one more speaker, Jarvis, who will, but let me, Jarvis, weave in James to be with us in this space. So James, what's your perspective? What do you sense is emerging? What that possible future paradigm of economy in front of us? And indeed, what is the role of entrepreneurs? Because that apparently seems to be one of critical notions running through this panel.
Well, I came in a perfect moment, I think, with what Daniel was saying, which is that we simply can't imagine a future without reinvigorating our ecosystems in which we live now. And we have to be considering the planet that we live on and how to best understand, from our perspective, hyper-local neighborhood infrastructure that can be self-reliant. Clean water, renewable energy, high-yield organic food production, waste-to-resource management in combination with affordable, dignified, passive home typologies, addressing critical housing shortages. By doing these things, by combining and integrating these things, we've seen around the world in our research that we can actually rejuvenate places and restore. And I like to say, if you take a half a step towards Mother Earth, she'll literally throw her arms around you. So these are the kinds of things that we're focusing on, and actually to use machine learning software to look at permaculture, to look at indigenous wisdom, and to especially focus that on, as quickly as possible, how can we do both greenfield development, new build housing, to stem suburban sprawl on farmland, but also to look back towards urban environments in terms of regreening. So I have a couple of slides I could show if you wanted to see some sort of pretty pictures. But at the end of the day, really, it's exactly what Daniel was saying. We simply have to focus on how do we feed, hydrate, empower, restore regenerative ecosystems in such a way that enables us to think about a brighter future. And I just want to follow up on one other point, which is where we're going economically with AI and machine learning and robotics, that depending upon who you believe, whether it's Oxford studies or others, that some amount of employment simply won't exist anymore. And depending upon who you believe, which percentage of that coming soon. And in that regard, we have to be looking more towards a combination of universal basic income, government-sponsored activities, but also what can our neighborhoods do to sustain us, to sort of lower that delta between what the neighborhoods can do and that UBI coming. And I think that would then allow the entrepreneur in everybody to start to emerge. People can start to think of solutions when that pressure is reduced. So that's germane also to the work that we do at Stanford. I'm currently director of what's called compassionate sustainability in the School of Medicine under Dr. James Doty at the CCARE Institute, which is the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research, and Education. And it's how do we look at reducing amygdala response and cortisol release based on how we live and where we live. And all of those things obviously contribute to stress. So the more we reduce those stresses, then we feel that we can have a better shot at a brighter future.
It's interesting that yesterday when we were exploring the possible dreams of humanity and the like collective pathways forward, one of the things emerged is that we really need to get into this low stress, stillness state of being in order to discover our collective future. It's interesting that you point to it from, let's say, scientific evidence right now. And these things seem to be really interconnected. Jarvis, I would like to bring you back into the conversation. So what's your perspective of the like combination of challenges and these like the possible drives into where it's leading us and what we need to take into consideration?
Yeah, well, I mean, who knows where it's leading us? I mean, we're just kind of we're along on the treadmill for a ride, aren't we? I think, but you know what's been said, I agree with. I agree. Even when Jerome challenged the paradox of yin yang and polarization, of course, I absolutely believe that in the deepest part of my spirit and heart. The problem is that most people don't. They do live in a polarized existence. So how do we take everybody on the journey? I think that's the very, very big question. I'm not sure that the current leadership model, the current political model, the current business model, unfortunately, is all embracing. And so I think there does need to be an uprising of consciousness across the masses. I believe that will happen through the conditional stress that nature will give us through opportunity. I believe that we're going to go through a great shamanic awakening that will come through challenge and will come through discomfort. I think it's the only way people evolve. I think that will remind us that there is no death. We are simply spiritual beings having an experience in a playful universe, and we've just forgotten how to play. So, you know, the problem is, and I do genuinely believe this, is it's a classic Einstein line that, you know, we're trying to fix all of these problems with the same thinking that caused it. That is not going to work. It's not working. It's never going to work. So unless we can evolve our question and evolve our responses, and I think that needs to be the most simple way, without the human arrogance of trying to turn everything into a personal, look at me, aren't I brilliant, aren't I clever, I've got all these amazing words, I'm fixing this, I'm fixing that. It's actually very simple. If we can remember that we are deeply connected, we are part of nature. Nature has got our back. She is our vessel. She is our spaceship. When I communicated with nature about the pandemic, the COVID-19 strain that came in, she told me that she'd put this into the consciousness of humanity so people can experience fear. And people did experience fear. It was the most fearful time in history that we know, certainly modern history. And then when I asked her again what was her game plan, she said, well, if people can just remember that they've taken everything from me in order to profit and make, create, etc., and they can just give me a little bit of appreciation, I'll fix this problem that you're calling a crisis in a blink. So, you know, I look at sages and shamans and wisdom keepers and playful beings that have managed to transgress through the human framework and experience themselves as spiritual beings having a human experience, and then life becomes playful. The problem is, I don't think many people are in that space, and therefore we're probably going to go through deep challenges in order to evolve as a species, as a planet, as a universe, and possibly as whatever the infinite other is. That's my my heartful take.
Thank you, Jarvis. And as we are approaching the end of the hour, and I know we basically started to touch and sense into these questions, and like Jerome said, in 25 words or less, capturing the essence of that transition. But let me indeed ask you a question that would be like a blitz at the end of this hour. If we think about one principle or one framing or one question that could accompany this us on this journey forward towards a future that is thrivable, hopeful for humanity and the planet in decades to come, what would that principle or that question or that anything you want to frame it, like in 24 words or less, what would it be? So I let each of you think, and Jerome, I know you always have crystal clear answers, so I'll start with you.
Synergy. Schools of business could teach synergetic intelligence, synergetic advantage, synergetic strategy, etc., rather than only teaching competitive intelligence and the rest of it. So I would say that think of synergy in all things would be my one word.
Thank you. Walt?
I would say the principle is human security for all. Human security for all is 7 pillars of human security: economic security, environmental security, food security, health security, personal security, community security, and political security. And most recently, the UN has recognized technology as a supporting pillar of human security. I think it's a concept that that really encompasses the problems that we've been talking today. And if we really focus on that paradigm and on that model and understand all of those components are interrelated with one another, and if we work on all of them, and if we empower entrepreneurs to address them effectively, I think we'll move forward.
Thank you. Daniel, what would be your principle or question or whatever?
A mentor friend of mine likes to say, trying to create the future without knowing the past is like planting cut flowers. And I think when we talk about technology, it's enamored with what we call modern technology. We so often forget that in the very long journey of our species, 99% of the time we were humans, we have been regenerative expressions of place, and we had technologies of the sacred that were handed on from one generation to the next that actually kept us on course, meeting uncertainty and surviving. The technology we've now created might just be a maladaptive detour in evolution. If we paid more attention to the sacred technology of counsel, of vision quest, of technologies that connect us to our larger being, and humbly ask advice from the larger context from which we emerge, then we might be able to wisely stir into the future. We need to anchor all the modern bling we've created in the wisdom of technologies of the sacred, and that includes the power of the word, and to understand how narratives are fundamentally shaping how we see the world and how we are captive to our own narratives when we even think about 50 years of economy or the future.
Thank you. Jarvis?
All of the above, and I would invite every man to support the feminine, support the women, and support the feminine, because as far as I can see, the feminine voice is the truest and most powerful creator that we have yet to experience. And it's been suppressed because the masculine was scared, or the male was scared. And so I would invite us all to embrace and get the feminine to speak up and take charge and recreate through the power of sound and voice and integrity.
And indeed, with 6 males conversing about this, recognizing that tomorrow, by the way, we will have explicitly the sessions dedicated to that, bringing in the voice of feminine, the voice of youth, the voice of indigenous and global south, to make sure that our future is not is not owned by hegemonies that it used to be owned by. James, what's your
wanted
principle?
to just, if I could, was just to share this very brief slide of before and after, to look at before open space that is being paved over for the wrong kinds of residential developments, to replace that with thriving, self-reliant infrastructure that can be really life support, critical life support systems at the neighborhood scale, really shortening the distances between where things are produced and where they are consumed. That has everything to do with resiliency in the built environment. And the same thing, both looking at urban areas to regreen block by block and to create literally days of islanded capability from how we can live in more safe and safer ways. Once we do this, I feel like everything else starts to open up for all the different kind of possibilities for a bright future, economically and otherwise.
Thank you. What a powerful message at the opening of the day. And I must say I'm leaving this first panel with a sense of hope. And the sense of hope that the future is already here. It might be unevenly distributed, but it's already here. And it's for all of us to discover. And thank you, Walt, for so persistently bringing the figure of entrepreneur, because I really sense there was a number of entrepreneurs speaking today. And I sense indeed, if we all can reach out to this creative impulse within us that sort of calls to this expression through different forms of projects, formats, technologies, approaches, we can see the future we want to manifest.